The dust cloud rose high above the railway platform as the last passenger train pulled away from Roswell Station in New Mexico territory, leaving behind a woman whose heart sank faster than the sun setting over the distant mesa. Helena Dawson stood alone on the weathered planks, her traveling bag at her feet, and her hand pressed against her lower back where the ache had become unbearable during the long journey from St. Louis. The station master had just informed her that the wagon service she had paid for in advance was no longer operating, the owner having succumbed to pneumonia 3 weeks prior, and no one had thought to inform the passengers who had prepaid their passage to the outlying homesteads. It was September of 1885, and the evening air carried the first hints of autumn coolness that would soon sweep across the high desert. Helena was a woman of substantial build, standing 5 feet and 7 inches tall with a frame that her late mother had always called sturdy and capable. Her chestnut hair was pinned back in a practical bun beneath her traveling bonnet, and her gray eyes surveyed the nearly empty platform with growing concern. She had spent the last of her money on the train ticket and the now useless wagon reservation, leaving her stranded 20 miles from the homestead where her cousin Margaret was expecting her arrival. The station master, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and trembling hands, had already explained that he could not help her. His own horse had gone lame 2 days prior, and the next train would not arrive until the following week. Helena had written to Margaret about her arrival date, but her cousin lived too far out to check the station regularly. She would wait for Helena to arrive at the homestead, not knowing that her cousin was stranded here with no way to reach her. As Helena contemplated her options, which seemed to narrow with each passing moment, she heard the steady clip of hooves against the hard-packed dirt of the main road. She turned to see a lone rider approaching the station, sitting tall in his saddle atop a magnificent bay mare. The cowboy wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face, and his dusty clothes spoke of long days working cattle under the relentless sun. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, and as he drew closer, Helena could make out more details of his appearance. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, and when he removed his hat as he approached the platform, Helena saw eyes the color of aged whiskey that regarded her with polite curiosity. He was handsome in the rugged way that men became when they earned their living from the land, with broad shoulders and capable hands that held the reins with practiced ease. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with the slight drawl of someone who had grown up in Texas before drifting north. "You look like you might be in need of some assistance." Helena straightened her spine, attempting to maintain her dignity despite the desperate nature of her situation. "Good evening, sir. I am afraid I find myself in rather difficult circumstances. I was meant to take a wagon to the Dawson homestead, but the service is no longer available, and I have no other means of reaching my destination." The cowboy's expression shifted to one of genuine concern. He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the platform, his boots making solid sounds against the wood. Up close, Helena could see that he was tall, at least 6 feet, and his presence had a solidity to it that made her feel oddly safer despite being a stranger. "The Dawson place, you say?" "That's quite a distance from here, about 20 miles northeast. Are you kin to Margaret Dawson? I am her cousin, arriving from Missouri. She is expecting me, but not until I can make my way to her property. I have written to her about my arrival, but she has no way of knowing that I am stranded here." Helena felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment at having to explain her predicament to this stranger. "I do not suppose you know of anyone who might be traveling in that direction who could provide transportation." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting from Helena to the empty platform and then to the setting sun. She could see him working through the problem, his brow furrowed slightly in thought. Finally, he looked back at her with a decision made evident in his eyes. "My name is Ethan Lawson, and I work at the Double J Ranch about 5 miles west of the Dawson place. I was just coming into town for supplies, but that can wait until tomorrow. I would be honored to offer you my horse for the journey, miss. I can ride behind and make sure you reach your cousin safely." Helena stared at him in surprise. "Sir, that is extraordinarily kind, but I could not possibly accept such an offer. The journey is long, and I am not a small woman. Your horse would be carrying a considerable burden with both of us." Ethan smiled then, and it transformed his entire face, bringing warmth to his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Miss, Rosie here is the strongest horse in 3 counties. She has carried wounded men twice my size out of dangerous situations, and she has never once complained. And if I may be so bold, you do not appear any heavier than a full load of supplies, which she carries regularly without issue. The real question is whether you are comfortable with such an arrangement, riding with a stranger." The station master, who had been listening to the exchange from the doorway of his office, stepped forward. "Miss Dawson, Ethan Lawson is as good a man as you will find in this territory. I have known him for 3 years since he came to work at the Double J, and he has never been anything but honest and hardworking. If he offers to help you, you can trust that offer is genuine and without any ulterior motive." Helena looked between the 2 men, weighing her options. The alternative was to spend the night at the station with no proper accommodations, and no guarantee that transportation would become available the next day or the day after that. Margaret would grow worried when Helena did not arrive as planned, and there was no way to send word to her. The sensible choice, though it meant accepting charity from a stranger, was to accept Ethan Lawson's offer. "You are very kind, Mr. Lawson," she said finally, inclining her head in acknowledgement. "I accept your offer with gratitude. I hope I can repay your kindness someday." "No repayment necessary, miss. It is simply the right thing to do. No one should be stranded out here as night falls." Ethan retrieved her traveling bag, which was heavier than he expected, causing him to adjust his grip. "What do you have in here, rocks?" Helena felt her cheeks flush again. "Books, mostly. I am a teacher by trade, and I brought some of my favorites with me. Margaret wrote that the settlement near her homestead is in need of someone to educate the children, and I hope to establish a school." "A teacher," Ethan said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "That is fine work, miss. The children around here could certainly benefit from proper education. Most of them learn their letters from their mothers if they are lucky, but there has been no formal schooling in these parts." He secured her bag to the saddle with practiced efficiency, then turned to help Helena mount the horse. Rosie was tall, and Helena hesitated, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she had ridden a horse. In St. Louis, she had walked or taken streetcars, and her riding experience was limited to childhood visits to her uncle's farm. "I should mention that I am not an experienced rider," she admitted, looking up at the horse with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "It has been many years since I have been on a horse." "That is not a problem at all," Ethan assured her. "Rosie is as gentle as they come, and I will be right behind you to make sure you do not fall. Here, put your foot in my hands and I will help you up." Helena gathered her skirts as modestly as possible and placed her booted foot in Ethan's interlaced fingers. He lifted her with surprising ease, and she found herself sitting astride the saddle, though her dress was not designed for such a position. She quickly arranged the fabric to maintain as much propriety as possible, grateful that the full skirt provided adequate coverage. Ethan swung up behind her with the fluid grace of someone who had been mounting horses since childhood. Helena suddenly became very aware of his presence close behind her, his arms coming around either side of her to take hold of the reins. She could feel the warmth of his chest against her back, and smell the scent of leather, horse, and something distinctly masculine that made her heart beat a little faster. "Are you comfortable, Miss Dawson?" he asked, his voice close to her ear but respectful in tone. "As comfortable as can be expected, Mr. Lawson. Thank you again for your assistance. Hold onto the saddle horn if you feel unsteady. The ride will be smoother if you relax and move with the horse's gait rather than fighting against it." His voice was patient and instructive, like a good teacher explaining a lesson to a student. With a gentle click of his tongue and a slight pressure of his legs, Ethan urged Rosie forward. The mare responded immediately, moving into a steady walk that carried them away from the station and onto the road that led northeast toward the Dawson homestead. The station master waved farewell, and Helena waved back, already feeling the slight sway of the horse's movement beneath her. The landscape around them was vast and open, with scrub brush and hardy grasses dotting the reddish earth. In the distance, mesas rose against the darkening sky, their flat tops silhouetted against the last streaks of orange and purple that marked the sun's departure. The air was clear and dry, so different from the humid thickness of Missouri summers. Helena took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean desert air. "It is beautiful here," she said, speaking more to herself than to Ethan, but he heard her and responded. "It is a harsh beauty, but yes, I find it beautiful too. When I first came here from Texas, I was not sure I would stay. The land seemed too empty, too unforgiving, but there is something about this place that gets into your blood. The sky is bigger here, and a man can see for miles in every direction. It makes you feel small and significant all at once." Helena turned her head slightly, trying to see his face. "What brought you here from Texas?" There was a pause, and she wondered if she had overstepped by asking such a personal question. But then Ethan answered, his voice carrying a weight of old pain that had been dulled by time but not entirely erased. "My father and I did not see eye to eye on much of anything. He wanted me to take over his ranch, to marry the daughter of a neighboring rancher, to live the life he had planned for me. I wanted to make my own way, to see what was beyond the borders of the land I had known all my life. We argued and I left. That was 4 years ago. I have not been back since." "Do you regret leaving?" Helena asked softly. "Some days more than others. I miss my mother and my younger sister, but I do not regret choosing my own path. A man has to be able to look himself in the mirror and respect what he sees there. I could not do that if I had simply become what my father wanted rather than discovering who I actually am." Helena understood that sentiment more than he might have guessed. Her own journey to New Mexico territory was partly an escape from expectations that had become suffocating. Her father had died when she was 17, leaving her mother alone with 3 daughters. Helena, as the eldest, had been expected to marry well and quickly, to provide security for the family. But Helena had wanted to teach, to use her education for something meaningful. When her mother died 2 years ago, Helena had been 22, and her younger sisters had already married. She had been free to choose her own path at last, and she had chosen teaching. "I understand that desire for independence," she told him. "I came here partly to escape similar expectations. My family could not understand why I wanted to teach rather than marry and have children like a proper woman should. There is nothing improper about wanting to do meaningful work, Ethan said firmly. Teaching is one of the most important jobs there is. You will be shaping young minds, giving children opportunities they would not otherwise have. That is something to be proud of. His words warmed her more than they probably should have. She was used to defending her choices, used to the subtle and not so subtle criticisms of her decisions. To hear this stranger, this cowboy she had known for less than an hour, express such straightforward support for her ambitions was unexpected and deeply appreciated. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge in brilliant profusion overhead. The moon was waxing, providing enough light to see the road ahead, though Ethan seemed to know the way by instinct as much as by sight. Rosie maintained her steady pace, her hooves finding purchase on the uneven ground with the sure-footedness of a horse who had traveled this route many times before. Helena found herself relaxing despite the unusual circumstances. The initial awkwardness of sitting so close to a strange man had faded, replaced by a growing sense of trust. Ethan had done nothing to make her uncomfortable. His hands remained on the reins, his posture respectful even though necessity required their proximity. He spoke to her like an equal, not with the condescension she sometimes encountered from men who believed women incapable of serious thought. "Tell me about Margaret," Ethan said after they had traveled perhaps 5 miles. "I have seen her at the general store a few times, but I do not know her well. She seems like a good woman, though I know she has had her share of hardships. Margaret is my cousin on my mother's side. She married a man named Thomas Dawson 12 years ago, and they came west full of dreams and determination. They established their homestead and worked it together for 8 years. Then, Thomas was killed in an accident with a spooked horse 3 years ago. Margaret could have gone back east, back to family and civilization, but she refused to abandon what she and Thomas had built together. She has been running that homestead alone ever since, with the occasional help of hired hands during harvest season." "That takes remarkable strength," Ethan observed. "Working a homestead alone is not easy for anyone, man or woman. She must be very determined." "She is one of the strongest people I know," Helena agreed. "When she wrote to me about the need for a teacher and invited me to come stay with her, I saw it as an opportunity for both of us. She will have family nearby again, and I will have meaningful work and a new start in a place where no one has any preconceived notions about what I should or should not do with my life." "That sounds like a good arrangement for both of you," Ethan said. "Having family nearby makes all the difference out here. The isolation can be hard on people who are not used to it. Some folks come west expecting adventure and opportunity, and they find those things, but they also find loneliness and hardship they were not prepared for. What about you?" Helena asked. "Have you found what you were looking for when you left Texas?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I think so," he said finally. "I have found honest work with people who respect me for what I can do rather than who my father is. I have found freedom to make my own choices and live with the consequences of those choices. I have found friends, good men who would stand beside me if trouble came. That is more than many people can say." "But," Helena prompted, sensing there was more he was not saying. He laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "But sometimes I wonder if there should be something more. The work is satisfying, and I like the men I work with. But at the end of the day, I go back to the bunkhouse and sleep in a narrow bed surrounded by snoring ranch hands. I see men like Thomas Dawson was, men who had someone to build a life with, who had a reason beyond just surviving to get up every morning. I wonder sometimes what that would be like." Helena felt her breath catch slightly. His words revealed a vulnerability she had not expected from this capable, confident cowboy. He was not just helping her out of obligation or simple kindness. He was a person with his own hopes and longings, his own uncertainties about the future. "I imagine the right person will come along when the time is right," she said, keeping her voice neutral despite the odd flutter in her chest. "These things cannot be forced or rushed." "Is that the voice of experience?" Ethan asked, and she could hear a smile in his voice. "Hardly," Helena admitted. "I've had very little experience with matters of the heart. Most of the men in St. Louis were either intimidated by my education or interested only in what advantages a connection to my family might bring them. I decided some time ago that I would rather be alone and purposeful than partnered and diminished. Any man who would be intimidated by an intelligent woman is not much of a man," Ethan stated firmly. "And anyone who would want to diminish you to make himself feel bigger is a fool. You deserve better than that." His words, spoken with such conviction, made Helena's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had told herself for years that she did not need anyone's approval or validation, that she was content with her independence. But hearing this near stranger defend her worth so readily touched something deep inside her that she had thought well protected. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," she managed to say. "That is very kind of you to say. It is just the truth, Miss Dawson, nothing kind about it." They continued riding through the night, the landscape around them transformed by moonlight into something almost otherworldly. Shadows deepened in arroyos and behind rocky outcrops, while the open spaces glowed with silvery light. The temperature had dropped considerably, and Helena was grateful for the warmth of Ethan's body behind her, blocking the worst of the cool breeze. As they rode, they talked about many things. Ethan told her about life at the Double J Ranch, about the owner, Jack Jenkins, who treated his men fairly and paid honest wages. He described the work of managing cattle in this harsh climate, the challenges of finding adequate water and grazing land, the dangers of rustlers and predators. His voice was animated when he spoke about the horses he helped train, his special skill that made him valuable to the ranch, beyond just his work with cattle. Helena, in turn, told him about her teaching experience in a small school in St. Louis, about the children she had worked with and the satisfaction of watching a student finally grasp a difficult concept. She spoke of her love of literature and history, of her belief that education was the key to opportunity and progress. She even found herself telling him about her fears regarding starting a school in such a remote area, wondering if the families would trust her, if the children would be interested in learning, if she had the skills to succeed in such a different environment from what she had known. "You will do fine," Ethan assured her. "I can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about teaching. That passion will carry you through the difficult moments, and the children will respond to it. They will sense that you genuinely care about their learning, and that will make all the difference." "How did you become so wise, Mr. Lawson?" Helena asked, a smile in her voice. "I am not wise at all," he protested. "I just know that people respond to genuine caring. Animals are the same way. A horse can tell when someone truly cares about its well-being versus when someone just sees it as a tool to be used. Children are even more perceptive than horses." The miles passed steadily, marked by the rhythm of Rosie's hooves and the quiet conversations between her two riders. Helena had expected the journey to be awkward and uncomfortable, but instead, she found herself enjoying it in a way she had not anticipated. There was something intimate about riding through the night together, sharing thoughts and stories that might not have been shared in the bright light of day or in the formal setting of a parlor. She became aware that she was comfortable leaning back against Ethan's chest, that his arms around her, as he held the reins, felt protective rather than presumptuous. She caught herself noticing small details about him. The calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way he smelled of sage and leather, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke softly so as not to startle the horse. This was dangerous territory, she warned herself. She had known this man for mere hours, and already she was noticing things about him that had nothing to do with gratitude for his assistance. She was here to build a new life, to establish herself as a teacher, not to lose her head over the first handsome cowboy who showed her kindness. But even as she tried to remind herself of her priorities, she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest when Ethan laughed at something she said, or the way her heart skipped when his voice dropped lower as he pointed out a coyote in the distance, not wanting to startle her, but wanting her to see the wild creature. After what seemed both an eternity and no time at all, Ethan said, "We are getting close now. Another mile or so and we will be at your cousin's homestead." Helena felt a confusing mix of relief and disappointment. She would be glad to reach her destination, to see Margaret and begin settling into her new life. But she was surprised to realize that she would miss this, the quiet intimacy of the ride, the easy conversation with Ethan Lawson. "I cannot thank you enough for your help tonight, Mr. Lawson," she said. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along when you did." "You would have found another solution," Ethan said confidently. "You strike me as a woman who does not give up easily when faced with obstacles." Perhaps, but this solution was far preferable to spending the night on the station platform, and the company has been unexpectedly pleasant. "For me as well, Miss Dawson. It has been a long time since I have had such an engaging conversation. Most evenings at the ranch involve playing cards and listening to the same stories I have heard a dozen times before. This has been a nice change." They rode over a small rise, and suddenly, a homestead came into view below them. It was a modest property, with a simple house built of adobe and wood, a barn that looked well maintained despite its age, and several corrals for livestock. Lamplight glowed in the windows of the house, a warm beacon in the darkness. As they approached, the front door opened and a woman emerged holding a lamp high. "Who goes there?" she called out, her voice strong but wary. A woman living alone had to be cautious about unexpected visitors. "Margaret, it is Helena," Helena called back. "I am sorry to arrive so late." The wagon service was no longer operating, and Mr. Ethan Lawson has been kind enough to bring me here on his horse. "Helena!" Margaret hurried forward as Ethan guided Rosie into the yard and brought her to a stop near the porch. "I have been so worried. When you did not arrive this afternoon, I thought perhaps you had missed your train or decided not to come after all." Ethan dismounted first, then reached up to help Helena down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her from the saddle and set her gently on the ground. Helena's legs were stiff from the long ride, and she wobbled slightly. Ethan kept his hands on her waist until she steadied herself. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up into his face. In the lamplight, she could see his features more clearly than she had been able to during the ride, and what she saw there made her breath catch. He was looking at her with an expression that went beyond simple courtesy, something warm and wondering that made her heart beat faster. "You are most welcome, Miss Dawson," he replied, his voice equally soft. For a moment they stood there, neither moving away, until Margaret's approach broke the spell. Margaret Dawson was a tall, lean woman in her mid-30s with blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid and blue eyes that were both warm and shrewd. She embraced Helena tightly, then turned to Ethan with genuine gratitude in her expression. "Mr. Lawson, I cannot thank you enough for bringing my cousin safely here. Please, come inside for some coffee and food before you ride back. It is the least I can offer after such kindness." "That is very generous of you, Mrs. Dawson, but I do not want to impose," Ethan began, but Margaret cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense. It is a long ride back to the Double J, and you must be as tired as poor Rosie here. Come inside, have something to eat and drink, and rest for a bit. I insist." Ethan looked at Helena, who nodded encouragingly, and he relented. "In that case, I accept your kind offer. Let me just see to Rosie first. Is it all right if I use your water trough and give her some rest in your barn?" "Of course. There is fresh hay in the barn, and you are welcome to leave her there as long as you need." Margaret linked her arm through Helena's and guided her toward the house. "Come, cousin, you must be exhausted. Let me get you settled while Mr. Lawson tends to his horse." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a stone fireplace providing warmth and light. 2 other doors led to what Helena assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and orderly, speaking to Margaret's capable management of her home. "I have prepared the spare room for you," Margaret said, leading Helena to one of the doors and opening it to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom with a real bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "It is not fancy, but it is clean and comfortable. You can freshen up if you like and then come back out for some food. You must be starving." Helena was indeed hungry, having had nothing since a meager lunch on the train many hours ago. She quickly washed her hands and face, removed her dusty traveling bonnet, and tidied her hair before returning to the main room. By then, Ethan had come back inside, and Margaret was bustling around the kitchen area, preparing coffee and setting out cold chicken, bread, and preserved vegetables. They sat around the simple wooden table, and for a while, conversation was minimal as they all satisfied their hunger. But gradually, as the edge of appetite was dulled, they began to talk. Margaret wanted to hear all about Helena's journey, and Helena found herself recounting the story of the failed wagon service and Ethan's timely arrival. "The Lord certainly sent the right person at the right time," Margaret observed, looking at Ethan with approval. "Not every man would have gone so far out of his way to help a stranger." Ethan looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It was nothing any decent person would not have done, madam. I could not leave Miss Dawson stranded at the station with no way to reach you." "Decent people are rarer than they should be," Margaret said firmly. "I have lived out here long enough to know that. You did a good thing today, Mr. Lawson, and I am grateful for it." As the evening wore on, Helena found herself studying the dynamic between her cousin and the cowboy. Margaret was clearly assessing Ethan, watching how he interacted with Helena, how he spoke and carried himself. There was a knowing gleam in her eye that made Helena slightly nervous. Margaret had always been perceptive, and Helena suspected her cousin was drawing conclusions about the connection that had formed between Helena and Ethan during their ride. Eventually, Ethan stood, thanking Margaret for her hospitality and saying he needed to start back to the ranch. "It will be well past midnight before I arrive, but I have made later rides before. Rosie knows the way home even in the dark." "You are welcome here any time, Mr. Lawson," Margaret said warmly. "Please do not be a stranger. And if you hear of any families who might be interested in sending their children to school once Helena gets established, I would appreciate you spreading the word." "I will certainly do that, madam." Ethan turned to Helena, and there was that look again, the one that made her feel warm and unsettled all at once. "Miss Dawson, it was truly a pleasure to meet you. I wish you all the best with your school. I am certain you will do wonderful things here." Helena stood and walked with him to the door, acutely aware of Margaret's interested gaze following them. "Thank you again, Mr. Lawson, for everything. Your kindness tonight meant more than you know." "It was my honor, Miss Dawson." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then seemed to think better of it. He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it to both women. "Good night, ladies." Helena stood in the doorway, watching as he mounted Rosie with that same fluid grace she had observed at the station. He turned the horse toward the direction of the Double J Ranch, then paused and looked back at her. Even in the dim light, she felt the connection between them, a thread that had somehow been woven during their hours together. Then he urged Rosie forward, and they disappeared into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading until there was only silence and the vast expanse of the night sky above. Helena closed the door and turned to find Margaret regarding her with a small smile. "Well," her cousin said, "that is an interesting development." "I do not know what you mean," Helena said, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. "Of course you do not," Margaret agreed, her tone making it clear she did not believe that for a moment. "Come, sit with me for a while. You must tell me everything about your journey, and then I will tell you all about what you can expect here in New Mexico territory." They sat by the fire, 2 cups of tea between them, and talked late into the night. Margaret filled Helena in on the surrounding community, such as it was. Scattered homesteads and ranches, a few families with children who would indeed benefit from schooling, and the challenges of building any kind of institution in such a remote area. "The nearest established town is Roswell, which you have seen, such as it is," Margaret explained. "There are perhaps 200 people living in town and maybe another 300 scattered around the surrounding area. It is not St. Louis, Helena. Life here is hard, and people have to be tough to survive. But there is also a kind of freedom here that you would never find back east. People care less about where you came from or what society expects of you. They care about whether you can pull your weight and whether you are trustworthy. If you can do those things, you will be accepted." "That sounds exactly like what I need," Helena said. "I am not afraid of hard work, and I think I can prove myself trustworthy given the opportunity." "I have no doubt of that," Margaret assured her. "You always were the determined one in the family. When you set your mind to something, you see it through. That quality will serve you well here." They talked about practical matters, where Helena might hold classes, how to reach out to families, what supplies she would need. Margaret offered the use of her barn, which could be cleaned out and fitted with benches and a makeshift desk. It would not be fancy, but it would provide shelter and space for students. "I can contribute some money toward supplies," Margaret said. "Thomas left me better off than some widows, and I have managed to keep the homestead profitable. Consider it an investment in the community. Education benefits everyone, not just the children who receive it directly." Helena felt tears prick her eyes at her cousin's generosity. "I will pay you back once I start receiving tuition from the families. We can discuss that later. For now, you need rest. Tomorrow we can start making plans, but tonight you should sleep. You have had a very long day." Helena could not argue with that. She was exhausted, emotionally as well as physically. The journey, the stress of being stranded, the unexpected encounter with Ethan Lawson, all of it had left her drained. She hugged Margaret goodnight and retreated to her small bedroom, where she changed into her nightgown and climbed between clean sheets that smelled of sage and sunshine. But despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept returning to the hours spent riding through the darkness with Ethan Lawson, to the timbre of his voice and the warmth of his presence. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had no business thinking about a man she had just met, a man she might never see again despite Margaret's invitation for him to visit. She had come here to teach, to build something meaningful with her life. Romance had no place in those plans. She had always been practical, always focused on her goals rather than on fanciful notions of love and partnership. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Ethan's face she saw in her mind, and the memory of his hand steady at her waist as he helped her down from the horse. The next several days were a whirlwind of activity. Helena and Margaret cleaned out a section of the barn, swept away years of accumulated dust and debris, and began transforming it into a schoolroom. They built simple benches from wood planks and constructed a desk from an old table. Helena unpacked her precious books. Arranging them carefully on shelves Margaret helped her install. Word spread quickly through the scattered community that a qualified teacher had arrived and was establishing a school. Margaret had many connections from her years of living in the area, and she used them all to spread the news. Within a week, several families had come to visit, parents wanting to meet Helena and assess whether they would trust her with their children's education. Helena met these visitors with a combination of confidence and humility. She spoke about her training and experience, but also acknowledged that she had much to learn about teaching in such a different environment from what she had known. She emphasized her commitment to providing quality education regardless of a family's ability to pay, offering to work with families on tuition arrangements if needed. Most of the parents seemed favorably impressed. They could see her genuine passion for teaching and her respect for their children. By the end of the second week, Helena had commitments from 8 families representing 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 14. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. Through all of this activity, Helena found her thoughts returning often to Ethan Lawson. She told herself it was simply because he had been kind to her, because she was grateful for his help. But she knew, if she was honest with herself, that it was more than that. There had been a connection between them, something that had sparked during those hours riding through the darkness, something that continued to glow in her memory. She wondered if he thought of her at all, or if she had been merely a pleasant interlude in his evening, forgotten as soon as he returned to his normal life at the ranch. The thought that she might mean nothing to him beyond a brief encounter made her chest tighten in a way she did not want to examine too closely. She was helping Margaret prepare dinner one evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, when they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Both women looked toward the window, and Helena felt her heart leap when she recognized the rider. Ethan Lawson sat astride Rosie, looking travel-worn but smiling as he dismounted and approached the house. He carried a package wrapped in brown paper under one arm. Margaret opened the door before he could knock, greeting him warmly. "Mr. Lawson, what a pleasant surprise. Please come in." "Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. I hope I am not intruding." His eyes sought out Helena, who stood near the kitchen area, her hands stilled in the act of slicing vegetables. "Miss Dawson, it is good to see you again." "Mr. Lawson," Helena managed, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. "This is an unexpected visit." "I hope a welcome one," he said, and there was a question in his eyes. "I have been meaning to come by since I brought you here, but the work at the ranch has been demanding. Roundup season, you understand. But I finally had an afternoon free, and I wanted to see how you were settling in." "That is very thoughtful," Margaret said, and Helena could hear the approval in her cousin's voice. "Helena has been making excellent progress with the school. She will have 15 students when classes begin next week." "That is wonderful news," Ethan said, genuine pleasure in his expression. "I knew you would succeed. The children are fortunate to have you as their teacher." He held out the package he had been carrying. "I brought you something. It is not much, but I thought it might be useful." Helena took the package, her fingers brushing against his as she did, sending a small jolt of awareness through her. She unwrapped it carefully to find a slate board and a box of chalk. "Mr. Lawson, this is perfect. I have been trying to figure out how to create a writing surface for the students. This is exactly what I needed. I am glad it will be useful. There is a general store in Roswell that orders supplies from back east. I asked them to get the slate and chalk for you." The gesture touched Helena deeply. He had thought of her, had taken time out of his busy schedule to acquire something he thought would help her with her school. It spoke to a consideration and kindness that went beyond mere politeness. "This is extraordinarily generous," she said. "Please let me pay you for it." "Absolutely not," Ethan said firmly. "It is a gift to celebrate the opening of your school. I will not accept payment." Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction, intervened. "Mr. Lawson, you must stay for dinner. We have plenty, and it would give you a chance to hear more about Helena's plans for the school." Ethan looked at Helena, clearly seeking her approval. She nodded, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Please stay. I would like to hear what you have been doing at the ranch as well." Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. Ethan described the challenges of roundup, the satisfaction of branding and sorting cattle, the occasional excitement when an ornery steer decided to make trouble. He had a gift for storytelling, making even mundane ranch work sound interesting, and both women found themselves laughing at his descriptions of some of the mishaps that had occurred. Helena, in turn, told him about her preparations for the school, about the families she had met and the children she would be teaching. She spoke about her plans for the curriculum, her hopes for what the students might achieve. Ethan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. Margaret, observing them both, made a decision. After they had finished eating and were lingering over coffee, she said, "You know, I just remembered I promised to take some preserves over to the Baker family this evening. Their youngest has been ill, and I said I would check on them. Helena, would you mind cleaning up while I am gone? And Mr. Lawson, please do not feel you need to rush off. Stay and visit with Helena as long as you like." The excuse was transparent and all three of them knew it, but neither Helena nor Ethan protested. Margaret gathered a basket of preserves, threw a shawl over her shoulders and departed, leaving them alone in the house. For a moment after Margaret left, silence hung between them. Then they both spoke at once. "I have been hoping. I wanted to see you." They stopped, laughed nervously, and Ethan gestured for Helena to continue. "I have been hoping you would come visit," Helena admitted, feeling brave. "I wanted to thank you again for your help that night, but it was more than that. I enjoyed talking with you, getting to know you. I have found myself thinking about our conversation often." Ethan's expression transformed, relief and happiness evident in his eyes. "I have thought of little else but you since that night," he confessed. "I kept finding excuses to delay coming here, because I was afraid I had imagined the connection I felt between us, that you would think I was presumptuous for showing up unannounced. But I could not stay away any longer. I had to see you again, had to know if what I felt was real or just wishful thinking." Helena's breath caught. "What did you feel?" He stood, moving around the table to stand before her. Helena rose as well, her heart pounding. They were close now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up into his face. "I felt like I had been waiting my whole life to meet you," Ethan said softly. "I know that sounds foolish, that we spent only a few hours together. But in those hours, I felt more alive, more myself than I have felt in years. You are intelligent and brave and passionate about things that matter. You challenge me to think differently, to be better. When I left here that night, I felt like I was leaving behind something important, something I might never find again. Tears pricked Helena's eyes. I felt it too, she whispered. I told myself I was being impractical, that I came here to teach, not to fall in love. But I could not stop thinking about you, wondering if you thought of me, hoping you would come back. Did you just say fall in love? Ethan asked, and there was wonder in his voice. Helena realized what she had said and felt her cheeks flame, but she was not one to take back the truth once spoken. Yes, she said firmly. I think I have been falling in love with you since you offered me your horse and rode behind me through the darkness. I know it is impractical and probably foolish, but I have never been one to deny what I feel when those feelings are genuine. Ethan raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished, and cupped her face gently between his palms. His touch was careful, reverent, as if she were something precious that might break. Helena, he said, using her given name for the first time, and the sound of it on his lips made her shiver. I do not care if it is impractical or foolish. All I care about is that you feel what I feel, that this is real for you as it is for me. It is real, she assured him. More real than anything I have ever felt before. He smiled then, that beautiful smile that transformed his entire face, and slowly, carefully, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But as Helena responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise and a claim all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his hand still cradling her face. I am going to court you properly, he said. I am going to come calling regularly, bring you flowers, take you on proper outings. I want to do this right, Helena. You deserve that. I do not need flowers or fancy outings, Helena said, though she was smiling. I just need you exactly as you are. You will have me as much or as little as you want, Ethan promised, but you will also have the courtship you deserve. I will not have anyone saying I did not treat you with the respect and honor you are due. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, until they heard the sound of Margaret's wagon returning. They separated reluctantly, and by the time Margaret entered the house, they were sitting at the table at a respectable distance, though the glow on both their faces would have told her everything even if she had not already guessed. How is the Baker child? Helena asked, trying to sound normal. Much improved, Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. The fever has broken, and she was sitting up and taking broth when I left. Did you two have a nice visit while I was gone? Very nice, Ethan confirmed, standing. But I should be heading back to the ranch now. It is getting late, and I have an early morning tomorrow. He turned to Helena. May I come calling again soon? Perhaps this Sunday afternoon if you are free. I would like that very much, Helena said, not even trying to hide her smile. Then I will see you Sunday, Ethan said. He bid both women good night and left, whistling as he mounted Rosie and rode off into the darkness. As soon as he was out of earshot, Margaret turned to Helena with a satisfied expression. Well, that developed quickly. Do not start, Helena warned, but she was smiling too broadly for the warning to carry any weight. I am not starting anything. I am simply observing that Ethan Lawson is a good man who is clearly smitten with my cousin, and that my cousin appears to return his feelings. As far as I am concerned, this is the best possible development. Helena sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Margaret, I came here to teach. I had my whole life planned out, establish the school, build a career, maintain my independence. And now, in the space of a few weeks, all of those plans seem to be changing, and I do not even mind. Is that foolish of me? Margaret sat down beside her and took her hand. Helena, Plans are just guidelines, not prison sentences. Life has a way of offering us opportunities we never anticipated, and sometimes those opportunities are better than anything we could have planned for ourselves. Ethan is a good man. Anyone can see that. If you have feelings for him and he has feelings for you, why should you deny that just because it does not fit into some plan you made before you even met him? But what about the school? What about my independence? Why do you have to choose? You can have both the school and a relationship with Ethan. In fact, having a partnership might make it easier to achieve your goals, not harder. Thomas and I worked together to build this homestead, and we accomplished far more as a team than either of us could have alone. Do not assume that loving someone means giving up who you are. With the right person, love makes you more yourself, not less. Helena absorbed her cousin's words, finding comfort in them. Margaret spoke from experience, from a marriage that had been genuinely happy despite ending too soon. If she said that love and independence were not mutually exclusive, perhaps it was true. "You really liked Thomas, did not you?" Helena asked softly. Margaret's expression grew wistful. "I loved him with everything I had. His death nearly broke me. But I would not trade the years we had together for anything. Loving him, being loved by him, made me stronger and braver than I ever would have been alone. That is what real love does, Helena. It does not diminish you. It multiplies you." Over the following weeks, Ethan kept his promise to court Helena properly. He came calling every Sunday, bringing wildflowers he had picked or small gifts he had made himself. A wooden bookmark he had carved, a leather cord to tie back her hair while teaching. They took walks around the property, rode together on Rosie to see the surrounding landscape, and sat on the porch in the evenings, talking until the stars came out. Helena's school opened as planned, with 15 excited and nervous children showing up that first day. She threw herself into teaching with all the passion and dedication she had promised, finding immense satisfaction in watching her students' progress. Some of them had never been to school before and struggled with the basics, while others were quick learners who absorbed knowledge like sponges. Helena worked with each child individually, tailoring her teaching to their needs and abilities. The families were supportive, sending their children regularly and speaking highly of Miss Dawson's teaching abilities. Word spread, and by the end of the first month, Helena had 3 more students, bringing her total to 18. The small barn schoolroom was crowded but filled with energy and the kind of excited learning that made teaching worthwhile. Ethan came to visit the school one afternoon, asking Helena's permission first. She welcomed him, and the children were fascinated by the tall cowboy who knew so much about horses and cattle. He answered their questions patiently, and even gave them an impromptu lesson on how to care for livestock, which fit perfectly into Helena's curriculum plans to teach practical knowledge alongside academic subjects. After the students left that day, Ethan helped Helena tidy the schoolroom. "You are doing amazing work here," he said, stacking slates carefully. "Those children are learning so much, not just reading and arithmetic, but how to think, how to question, how to understand the world. You are changing their futures, Helena." "That is my hope," she said. "Education is the greatest gift anyone can give a child. It opens doors that would otherwise remain closed forever." "You are a gift," Ethan said, setting down the slates and coming to stand before her. "To these children, to this community, to me." Helena reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight stubble along his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "You are a gift to me too," she said softly. "I never expected to find this, Ethan. I never expected to find you." "I love you," he said, the words coming out in a rush as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it has only been a few months, and maybe it is too soon to say it, but I cannot keep it inside any longer. I love you, Helena. I love your intelligence and your passion and your strength. I love the way you look at the world and the way you make me see things differently. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Helena felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have loved you since that night you rode behind me through the darkness. I have loved you through every visit, every conversation, every moment we have spent together. Yes, Ethan. Yes to everything. Yes to spending our lives together." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and longing into the kiss. When they broke apart, both were breathless and laughing, giddy with happiness. "I want to do this properly," Ethan said. "I want to ask Margaret for her blessing since you have no father here to ask. And I want to buy you a proper ring. It might not be much, but I have been saving my wages and I can afford something nice." "I do not need a fancy ring," Helena protested. "I just need you." "You are getting both," Ethan said firmly. "I am going to marry you properly, Helena Dawson, with all the ceremony and celebration you deserve." The next Sunday, Ethan came to the homestead dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. He asked Margaret for a private word, and they went outside while Helena waited nervously in the house. When they returned, Margaret was smiling and Ethan looked relieved. "She said yes," he announced. "Well, she said it was not really her decision to make since you are a grown woman capable of making your own choices, but that she approved of me and thought we would be good together." "That is high praise from Margaret," Helena said, looking at her cousin with affection. "She does not give her approval lightly." "I told him he had better treat you right, or he would answer to me," Margaret said, her tone light but with an underlying steel that made it clear she was serious. "But I also told him that I could not think of a better man for you if I tried. You are good for each other. Anyone can see that." Ethan produced a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a gold ring set with a small but beautifully cut diamond. "It is not the biggest or fanciest ring," he said, suddenly nervous. "But it is real gold and a real diamond, and I chose it myself, thinking of you the whole time." "It is perfect," Helena said, her voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Ethan took the ring from the box and got down on one knee, taking Helena's hand in his. "Helena Dawson, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my days making you happy and supporting your dreams and building a life together that is better than anything either of us could achieve alone?" "Yes," Helena said, tears streaming down her face again. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her while Margaret applauded and laughed in the background. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Dawson homestead. The minister came out from Roswell, and many of the families from the community attended, along with several of the men from the Double J Ranch. Jack Jenkins, Ethan's employer, gave Helena away since she had no male relatives present, and he did so with genuine pride and affection. Margaret stood beside Helena as her matron of honor, and one of Ethan's friends from the ranch served as his best man. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, conducted in the barn schoolroom that Helena had worked so hard to establish. It seemed fitting that they should be married there, surrounded by the evidence of Helena's work and the community she had become part of. Helena wore a simple dress of ivory muslin that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Ethan had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful or more certain of anything in her life. As she spoke her vows, looking into Ethan's eyes and seeing the love and commitment there, she knew she was making the right choice. Ethan wore his best suit, which he had owned since leaving Texas but rarely had occasion to wear. He stood tall and spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice that carried to everyone gathered in the room. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Helena with a tenderness and joy that brought tears to many eyes. The celebration that followed was lively and warm. The community had brought food to share, and tables had been set up outside where everyone ate and talked and celebrated the new union. There was music, provided by a fiddle player who lived on a nearby ranch, and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Through it all, Helena and Ethan remained close to each other, their hands linked, their eyes meeting frequently across the crowd. They both knew how fortunate they were to have found each other, to have recognized the connection between them and had the courage to pursue it. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Margaret pulled Helena aside. "You are going to be happy," she said simply. "I can see it in the way you look at each other. Treasure that, Helena. Love like that is precious and rare." "I will," Helena promised, embracing her cousin. "Thank you for everything, Margaret, for bringing me here, for supporting me, for believing in me. I would not have any of this without you." "You would have found your way," Margaret assured her. "You always do. But I am glad I could help, and I am glad you are here. Having family nearby makes everything better." Ethan had made arrangements with Jack Jenkins to take a week away from the ranch for a honeymoon of sorts. He and Helena would stay at the homestead for that week, giving them time alone together before they moved to the small house on the Double J property that Jack had offered them. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it would be theirs, a place to start their married life together. That first night as husband and wife, Helena and Ethan lay in bed together in what had been Helena's room, listening to the sounds of the desert night outside. Helena's head rested on Ethan's chest, his arm wrapped securely around her, and she felt a peace and contentment she had never experienced before. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "I am thinking about how strange and wonderful life is," Helena said. "A few months ago, I was in St. Louis, planning to come here and dedicate my life to teaching. I had no thoughts of marriage or romance. And then I got stranded at that station, and you rode up on Rosie, and everything changed. You regret how things turned out." There was vulnerability in his question, a need for reassurance. Helena propped herself up so she could look at him. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "I love teaching, and I will continue to teach as long as I am able, but I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. You make me happier than I ever imagined possible. How could I regret that?" "You make me happier than I ever imagined possible too," Ethan said, pulling her close again. "I came west looking for freedom and independence, and I found those things. But I also found something I did not even know I was looking for. You, a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with. You are everything I never knew I needed." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future together. Helena would continue teaching, and Ethan fully supported that. They discussed the possibility of expanding the school as more families moved into the area. Ethan suggested he might be able to add some practical lessons about animal husbandry and land management to Helena's curriculum, things that would be useful for children growing up in this environment. They talked about having children of their own someday, about how they would balance their work with family life. Helena had always wanted children, but had resigned herself to the possibility that she might never have them if it meant giving up teaching. Now, with Ethan, she could envision a future that included both, teaching other people's children and raising her own, supported by a husband who valued her work as much as she did. The week they spent at the homestead passed in a blur of happiness. They helped Margaret with chores around the property, took long rides together exploring the landscape, and spent hours simply talking and learning more about each other. Helena taught Ethan about literature and history, reading passages from her favorite books and discussing ideas. Ethan taught Helena more about horses and showed her how to shoot a rifle properly, insisting that any woman living in this territory should know how to defend herself if necessary. At the end of the week, they moved to their new home on the Double J Ranch. The house was small but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, and a bedroom that was just large enough for a bed and a chest of drawers. There was a porch that faced east, perfect for watching the sunrise, and a small garden plot where Helena could grow vegetables. Jack Jenkins welcomed Helena warmly to the ranch, making it clear that she was not just Ethan's wife, but a valued member of their small community. The other ranch hands were respectful and friendly, and Helena quickly felt at home in her new surroundings. She continued to teach at the school in Margaret's barn, making the ride there and back several times a week. Ethan often accompanied her when his work allowed, and on days when he could not, she made the journey on a gentle mare that Jack had given her as a wedding present. Helena named the mare Daisy, and the two became close companions. The rhythm of their life together was satisfying and full. Ethan worked long hours at the ranch, but he always came home to Helena in the evenings, and they spent that time together treasuring every moment. They cooked meals together, talking about their days. Helena would tell him about her students' progress, and Ethan would share stories from the ranch. They would sit on their porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn brilliant colors, and feel grateful for everything they had found together. As autumn turned to winter, Helena realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. His expression cycled through surprise, wonder, and pure joy in the space of seconds. "A baby," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "We are going to have a baby, we are," Helena confirmed, smiling at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Ethan laughed and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully as if suddenly afraid he might hurt her. "I am more than happy. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am everything all at once." They told Margaret the next time they saw her, and she was equally delighted. She promised to help Helena through the pregnancy and birth, sharing her knowledge and experience. She had helped deliver several babies in the community over the years, and was confident she could see Helena through safely. Helena continued teaching through the winter, though she modified her activities as her pregnancy progressed. The families were understanding and supportive, and some of the older female students even helped her with tasks that became difficult as she grew larger. She taught until she was 7 months along, at which point Margaret and Ethan both insisted she take some time to rest before the baby came. Ethan was attentive and protective during the pregnancy, sometimes overly so. He worried about Helena overdoing it, about her making the ride to and from the school, about 100 different things that might go wrong. Helena found his concern endearing even when it was excessive, understanding that it came from a place of deep love and the fear of losing what had become most precious to him. Their son was born on a warm day in May of 1886, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Helena exhausted but triumphant. Margaret attended the birth, along with another woman from the community who had experience with such matters, and Ethan paced anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. When Margaret finally let him into the room, he found Helena propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with joy as she held their son. The baby was red-faced and squalling, his tiny fists waving in the air, and Ethan felt his heart expand in his chest until he thought it might burst. "We have a son," Helena said, her voice thick with emotion. "A healthy, beautiful son." Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny person they had created together. He reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Thomas Ethan Lawson, honoring Margaret's late husband and carrying on Ethan's name. Young Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he thrived from the beginning. Helena's love for him was fierce and immediate, a protective maternal instinct she had not fully anticipated. And Ethan proved to be a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he was home, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, and gazing at him with such love and wonder that it made Helena's heart ache in the best possible way. Helena took a full year off from teaching to care for Thomas, but she chafed at being away from her students. She missed teaching, missed the satisfaction of watching children learn and grow. When Thomas was a year old, she arranged with Margaret and some of the other mothers in the community to share childcare responsibilities, allowing her to return to teaching part-time. It was a juggling act, balancing motherhood with her career, but Helena was determined to do both. She loved being a mother, loved watching Thomas grow and develop his own personality. But she also loved teaching and refused to give it up entirely. Ethan supported her decisions completely, helping whenever he could and never suggesting that she should abandon her work to focus solely on their home. When Thomas was 2, Helena became pregnant again. Their daughter, Ruth Margaret Lawson, was born in the spring of 1889. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, with her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair. Helena and Ethan were equally smitten with her, and young Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help care for his baby sister. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. The school grew as more families moved into the area, and eventually Helena had to hire an assistant teacher to help manage the increased number of students. The small barn schoolroom was expanded and eventually replaced with a proper schoolhouse that the community built together, everyone contributing materials or labor or both. Ethan advanced in his position at the Double J Ranch, becoming Jack Jenkins's right-hand man, and eventually a partner in the operation when Jack decided to semi-retire. The partnership came with a larger house on the ranch property, one with enough room for their growing family and even space for Helena to have a small library and study. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, a beloved aunt to their children and a trusted friend to both Helena and Ethan. She never remarried, claiming that she had already had the great love of her life and was content with her memories and her independence. But she was never lonely, surrounded as she was by family and community. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight and survival was uncertain. There were droughts that threatened the ranch and the crops. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of life in a harsh environment. But through everything, Helena and Ethan faced challenges together, their love for each other and their family providing strength and resilience. They added 2 more children to their family, another son, James, born in 1892, and a daughter, Sarah, born in 1895. Their house was always full of noise and energy, children and animals and the constant activity of a busy working ranch. Helena continued to teach, though as her family grew, she cut back her hours and focused more on training other teachers to carry on her work. Ethan thrived in his partnership with Jack Jenkins, helping to expand the Double J into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. He never forgot his roots or the lessons he had learned working his way up from a simple ranch hand. He treated the men who worked for him with respect and fairness, just as he had always been treated, and they responded with loyalty and hard work. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Ethan and Helena stood on the porch of their house, watching their 4 children play in the yard. Thomas was 19 now, a young man preparing to go to university back east to study law. Ruth was 16, already showing signs of her mother's intellectual curiosity and passion for learning. James was 13 and obsessed with horses, following in his father's footsteps. Sarah, at 10, was the baby of the family, spirited and determined and everyone's favorite. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Helena asked, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. She was 44 now, her hair showing threads of silver, and her face marked with the lines of a life well lived. But in Ethan's eyes, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her standing on that train platform, stranded and uncertain but determined to face whatever came next. 20 of the best years of my life," Ethan said, pulling her close. He was 45, his dark hair more gray than not, his face weathered by years of working outdoors. But his eyes were still the same warm whiskey brown, and they still looked at Helena with all the love and admiration he had felt that first night riding through the darkness together. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped at the station that evening?" Helena asked. "If you had ridden straight back to the ranch instead?" "I try not to," Ethan admitted. "The thought of a life without you in it is unbearable. I think about how close we came to missing each other, how many little things had to align perfectly for us to meet when and how we did, and it makes me appreciate what we have even more." "I think about it too," Helena said. "I think about how terrified I was, stranded there with no way to reach Margaret, no plan for what to do next. And then you appeared, offering help without any expectation of reward or recognition. That act of simple kindness changed my entire life." "You changed my life," Ethan corrected. "I was the one who was truly stranded before I met you, drifting without real purpose or connection. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. You gave me a family, a home, a life worth living. I am the one who should be grateful." Margaret, who had come over for the anniversary dinner, joined them on the porch. She was 54 now, her blonde hair completely silver but still vigorous and sharp. "You are both being too modest," she said with a smile. "The truth is, you saved each other. That is what real love does. It is not about one person rescuing another. It is about 2 people choosing each other and then working together to build something better than either could achieve alone." "When did you become so wise?" Helena teased her cousin. "I was always wise," Margaret retorted. "You just were not always ready to hear it." They laughed together, and then Ethan raised his glass in a toast. "To 20 years of marriage, to family, to the future, and to the chance encounter that started it all. May we have 20 more years just as blessed as these have been." 20 more years at least," Helena agreed, clinking her glass against his. "I plan to spend the rest of my life loving you, Ethan Lawson, however long that may be." As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red, the family gathered for the anniversary celebration. There was laughter and good food, stories and memories, the comfortable warmth of people who loved each other gathered together. Helena looked around the table at her family, at the life she and Ethan had built together, and felt a profound sense of gratitude and contentment. The school she had started continued to thrive, now a permanent institution in the community with multiple teachers and a real building. Dozens of children had passed through its doors over the years, receiving educations that opened opportunities their parents had never had. Some had gone on to universities, Others had become successful in business or trade, but all of them carried with them the knowledge and confidence that Helena and her fellow teachers had helped instill. The Double J Ranch continued to prosper, providing employment for many families and contributing to the economic stability of the region. Ethan's leadership, combining his father's business sense with his own fairness and innovation, had made it a model for other ranches in the territory. But more than professional success or community contribution, Helena and Ethan had built a marriage based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering support. They had created a family filled with love and possibility. They had proven that it was possible to balance personal ambitions with partnership, to be true to oneself while also being devoted to another. As the evening wore on and the children began to tire, Helena and Ethan found themselves alone on the porch again, as they had been so many evenings over the past 20 years. Ethan wrapped his arm around Helena's shoulders, and she leaned into his embrace, fitting against him as perfectly as she had that first night on Rosie. "I love you," Ethan said, the words as sincere and heartfelt as they had been the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," Helena replied. "More now than ever before, which I did not think was possible. But love grows, does not it? It deepens and expands and becomes more profound with time." "It does when it is real love," Ethan agreed, "the kind of love we have." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. The desert night was cool and clear, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant call of coyotes. It was peaceful and perfect, this life they had built together from a chance encounter at a train station so many years ago. In the years that followed, their love continued to grow and deepen. They watched their children become adults, pursuing their own dreams and building their own lives. Thomas did become a lawyer, though he returned to New Mexico to practice, unable to stay away from the land of his birth for long. Ruth became a teacher like her mother, taking over the school when Helena finally retired in her 60s. James took over the management of the Double J when Ethan and Jack decided to fully retire, bringing his own innovations while respecting the traditions his father had established. And Sarah, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first female physicians in the New Mexico territory. Helena and Ethan became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family growing and branching in ways they could never have imagined that night when they first met. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies bearing the marks of age and hard work, but their love remaining constant. On a warm evening in the spring of 1925, Helena and Ethan sat on the porch of the house they had shared for nearly 40 years. Helena was 65, Ethan 66, and they had just celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. "We built something good, did not we?" Helena asked, her hand in Ethan's, their fingers interlaced. "We built something wonderful," Ethan corrected. "A family, a legacy, a life filled with love and purpose. That stranded woman at the train station and the cowboy who stopped to help her did better than either of them could have dreamed." That cowboy did not just offer his horse, Helena reflected. He offered his heart, his future, his unwavering support and love, and that woman was smart enough to accept. "I am the lucky one," Ethan insisted. "I found the missing piece of my soul that night. You completed me, Helena. You made me whole." They sat together as the sun set, as they had done thousands of times over the 40 years of their marriage. The landscape had not changed much, still vast and harsh and beautiful, still home. And their love had not changed either in its essential nature. though it had grown richer and deeper with each passing year. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Helena rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he held her close. They were old now, their bodies worn from decades of hard work and life on the frontier. But their spirits were young, their love as fresh and vital as it had been that first night when a chance encounter had changed both their lives forever. No regrets. Ethan asked softly, a question he had asked many times over the years. Not a single one, Helena replied, also as she had replied many times before. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow has been worth it because I have had you beside me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ethan Lawson. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Dawson. They sat together in the peaceful darkness. Two souls perfectly matched. Two lives perfectly intertwined, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together and the choice they had made to build a life of love. The cowboy who had offered his horse to a stranded woman and rode behind her home had found more than he bargained for, had discovered a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. And the woman who had been stranded at that station, uncertain and alone, had found not just transportation to her destination but a companion for life's journey, a partner who would ride beside her through all the years to come, through joy and sorrow, success and failure, youth and age, until death would finally part them. But even death could not diminish what they had built together, the love they had shared, the family they had created, the lives they had touched. Their story would live on in their children and grandchildren, in the school that still educated children nearly 50 years after Helena had first opened its doors, in the ranch that continued to thrive under new generations of leadership. It was a story of chance and choice, of kindness repaid with love, of two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build something beautiful together. It was a story of the West, of hard work and determination, of building something from nothing in a harsh and unforgiving land. But most of all, it was a love story, as true and enduring as any love story ever told. And as Helena and Ethan sat together on their porch under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by the evidence of their long and fruitful life together, they knew they had been blessed beyond measure. The chance encounter at a train station had been the beginning of an adventure neither had anticipated, a love neither had sought but both had embraced when it found them. It had been worth everything, every challenge faced, every sacrifice made, every difficult moment endured. Because in the end, they had found what every heart seeks and what few are fortunate enough to discover. A love that transforms, that completes, that endures through all the seasons of life from youth to age, from beginning to end. And that love, born on a September evening in 1885 when a cowboy stopped to help a stranded woman, would endure long after both of them were gone, living on in the hearts of their descendants, and in the story that would be told for generations to come about how true love can begin in the most unexpected ways and grow into something that changes not just two lives, but the lives of everyone it touches.